Mystery films can typically be divided into two categories: solved and unsolved. Ones that provide the answers and ones that only end up providing more questions. Unsolved mysteries can be frustrating, but I usually find these more compelling. They leave you with something to discuss and think about. The film I want to discuss today is one of the best unsolved mystery films I've ever seen. It's a French film written and directed by Michael Haneke. He describes the film as a tale of morality and how one lives with guilt. It tells the story of a married couple who are terrorized by a series of surveillance videotapes left on their front porch. Let's investigate the mystery of Caché. The film opens up with a lengthy static shot of a residential street in Paris. After the credits, we hear a voiceover of a couple talking. And then the movie pauses and begins to fast forward. We then realize that we are actually watching a videotape which is being played on a TV set in the home of our main couple. From the opening shot, Caché subverts our expectations, letting us know that perception is not always reality. I love when movies do this. It is a genuine surprise. It's an excellent example of the immersive nature of film, and also the manipulative nature of film. What we learn is this is a videotape left on the front porch of this couple, George and Anne. The video runs for a couple hours and shows the outside of their home from across the street. Someone is watching them. Someone is spying on them, and they want them to know they're being spied on. Who is doing this, and why are they doing it? This is the central mystery of Caché. George and Anne first think the tape may just be a prank being played on them by one of their son Perrault's friends. However, they move past this idea shortly after when they receive another tape. This one is wrapped in a piece of paper which contains a sinister drawing. The drawing looks like it was done by a child, but the picture shows a person bleeding from the mouth. And here's where we get our first clue. During the middle of this scene, when George and Anne are reviewing the second tape, the film inexplicably cuts to a brief shot of a young, unidentified child bleeding from the mouth. Who is this? Is this the child from the drawing? The following day, George receives the same drawing sent to him at work, and even Perrault is sent this drawing at school. George and Anne decide to go to the police, but they are unable to do anything since they haven't explicitly been threatened. We then see another shot of the boy with the bleeding mouth. The shot is a bit longer, but still no further context is added. However, there is something significant about this shot. We will return to it. Later, George and Anne are having a dinner party with some friends. They hear a knock at the door, and George goes to investigate. He finds another videotape wrapped in another drawing, this time of a bloody chicken. He takes it into the house and reluctantly watches it with Anne and the dinner guests. The tape shows something different this time. We see a video from inside of a car driving in the country, and we see an old home made of stone. George then reveals something very important. This is his childhood home. After this, George goes and visits his mother, who, due to her poor health, is unable to leave her home. George then asks her about someone from his childhood, someone named Majid. He says he's been having dreams about Majid. We learn that Majid was a boy who they were considering adopting at one point, but they never ended up going through with it. Shortly after this, the film jump cuts again. This time we see the same boy. He has an axe and is beheading a chicken. Blood sprays on his face. He then turns toward another boy who's watching him and approaches him still carrying the axe, seemingly with sinister intentions. And then George wakes up. We can now conclude that this young boy we have now seen 3 times is Majid. And these are dreams George is having about this time in his childhood. Something from his past is beginning to resurface. Another jump cut shows us video from inside a car, this time driving through the city. And then it cuts to a POV shot of someone walking down a hallway in an apartment building. It turns and stops at a door, Unit 47. And here again is another videotape. The editing in this film is pretty great. It constantly has us guessing what is the source of what we're watching. It keeps us on edge. And it's here where George believes he might know who is sending the tapes. He tells Anne he has a hunch, but won't divulge who he believes it is. This sets her off, understandably so. And here's where we begin to see Haneke's themes in full force. Clearly, there are complicated events from George's past that are causing him to suspect Majid is the one sending the tapes. George thinks he could be doing it out of spite and revenge, which means something must have happened to Majid. This gives us our first implication that George has a past of which he feels guilty about, and this guilt is causing him to hold secrets from his wife, which is starting to effectively break down their relationship. And I can't help but quickly call out the performance from Juliette Binoche in this scene. She is fantastic, just pure, raw emotions so effectively delivered. George and Anne are able to decipher a road sign from the video, and George visits apartment 47. He knocks on the door, and sure enough, this is the home of Majid. George confronts him, but Majid swears he isn't the one sending the tapes. George then threatens Majid and storms off. The film once again subverts our expectations here. At this point, we the audience are much like George in that we totally believe that Majid is guilty. It makes sense. There seems to be some evidence there based on what we know. And it seems that Majid has intentionally led George to his home through the videotape. However, if Majid really was the one making the tapes, we would expect his demeanor to be completely different than what it is. Throughout this scene, Majid is calm, soft-spoken, and also seems to genuinely be surprised when George arrives, and again when he is informed about the tapes that George and Anne have been getting. If Majid is lying, it is a very convincing lie. But if he's telling the truth and isn't responsible for sending the tapes, then who could possibly know this information about George's childhood? George returns home and lies to Anne about his visit with Majid. He tells her that the apartment has been unoccupied. And then, in an unexpected twist, we see the next videotape is actually a recording from George's confrontation with Majid. This is another excellent dramatic scene in the film. Here, George begins to come clean to Anne and fills in more of the backstory of his childhood memories regarding Majid. We learn that Majid's parents worked for George's parents. Majid's family is Algerian, and at one point they were temporarily called back to their home country, but Majid stayed. And here is where Haneke inputs actual history into this film. There is a little-known event called the Paris Massacre of 1961, where during the French-Algerian War on October 17th, somewhere between 100 to upwards of 300 Algerian protesters were killed by the French National Police. And Majid's parents were victims of this tragedy. At this point, George's parents were planning on adopting Majid. However, George, who is only 6 years old at this time and was an only child, didn't want another sibling. And so, he made up lies about Majid and would do things to get him in trouble. Later that evening, Pierrot doesn't return home from swim practice, and George and Anne are unable to locate him. They contact the police, and George gets them to visit Majid's home. Upon their arrival, we see Majid has a son, Walid, and they tell the authorities they don't know Pierrot and have nothing to do with his disappearance. George doesn't believe them and now begins to suspect Majid's son is responsible for sending the tapes. The next morning, Pierrot returns home. We find out he ended up staying with a friend and never told his parents. Anne sits him down to talk, and Pierrot is quiet and disconnected, and clearly upset towards Anne. He flippantly suggests Anne is having an affair with a man named Pierre, one of their friends at the dinner party and someone Anne has spoken with about her concerns with everything that has transpired. Anne denies any relationship and insists they are only friends. Following this, George receives a phone call from Majid, and he invites him back to his apartment. Upon his arrival, and in a moment of pure horrific shock, Majid slits his own throat in front of George. Due to George's lies about Majid when they were children, it caused Majid to miss out on a structured and secure upbringing with George's parents. Instead, he was sent to an orphanage, and Majid lived a life filled with difficulties and tragedies. The next day, when George arrives at work, Walid is there in an attempt to confront him. George says he doesn't have time to speak with him. The elevator scene here is fantastic. It builds tension and suspense in such a natural way. All one shot, no music, we just stare at Walid and George's reflection and wait in anticipation to see what's going to happen. George finally relents after Walid makes a scene. George tells him he doesn't feel responsible or guilty for what Majid did, and he insists that Majid and Walid are responsible for sending the tapes. He then threatens Walid. Walid understands and realizes the type of person George is, and realizes he's never going to get an apology or any sympathy from him. This now takes us to the final 3 scenes of the film. George returns home that day. He calls Anne and lets her know he is taking some sleeping pills and going to bed early. And I believe this symbolizes that there has been no character arc in George. We see his character turning off the bedroom lights, closing the curtains, symbolically shutting out the world, remaining dark in his ignorance, refusing to take any sort of responsibility, closing himself off to the world, and suppressing his guilt once again, having learned nothing and showing no personal change or growth throughout the course of the film. The next scene, we flash back and see the tragic moment in which a young Majid is picked up and taken away to the orphanage, drastically changing the trajectory of his entire life. And the final shot of the film is borderline perfect. We see a wide shot outside of Perrault's school. School is dismissing for the day, and kids are exiting the building to go home. And if we look closely enough, we see Perrault speaking to someone. Upon closer inspection, we see that it is Walid. Do they know each other? Are they friends? Is this the first time they're speaking? There is a significant age difference, and so they can't be in the same class. How do they know each other if they do? Is this just a coincidence, or is there more to read into this encounter? It's a perfectly ambiguous way to end this already ambiguous film. So what are we left with? Who sent the tapes? I think ultimately the mystery is unsolvable. The title cachet in English is the word hidden, and what we're ultimately left with regarding the truth is that it remains hidden. But let's discuss the possibilities. Number 1 is that Majid sent the tapes. Certainly, he has the knowledge from George's childhood to make these tapes, along with the drawings. But I can't help but acknowledge his demeanor once again when George first confronts him. If he really made the tapes and drew George to his home, that shows intent and motive. But then when George shows up, Majid seems to have such a lack of any intention. He has no agenda, no motive of anything. He seems so calm and timid, soft-spoken and peaceful. Also, bursting into tears after George leaves gives the impression he is genuinely upset about what happened. And also, would Majid really kill himself in front of George, just as a last-ditch effort to make a point or try and get George to apologize and ask for forgiveness? The second possibility is that Majid's son, Walid, is responsible for the tapes. He could have been told from his father about what transpired when he was a kid, and therefore Walid could have the necessary knowledge to make the tapes. However, if he is making them, he seems to be making them without his father's knowledge. It also seems very irresponsible to lead George to your home, causing him to confront your father about past trauma without his knowledge, and Walid seems to have more respect for his father than to do this. Possibly father and son could be working together and this whole thing was planned out. but that seems like a bit of a stretch. The third possibility is that Walid and Perot are working together and sending the tapes. And this takes us back to the final shot of the film. All we can do is speculate about this encounter. Earlier in the film, when Majid and Walid are arrested, they swear they don't know who Perot is. The final shot seems to contradict this, or maybe not. This could be the first time they've met. Or they could be conspiring and scheming further. Maybe they've been working together all along. Or maybe Walid was able to figure out who Perot is, and this is him beginning a scheme of his own to get revenge on George by befriending his son. And when it comes to motive, Walid's motive is very clear. But when it comes to Perot, we see a possible motive when he responds to Anne when she talks to him after he was missing. We know that Perot suspects Anne to be having an affair with Pierre. This could be all the motive he needs to partner with Walid to make these tapes. There is one more possibility, but I have a few things I'd like to touch on before I reveal it. I watched an interview with Michael Haneke where he discusses the film, and here's what he says.
Mais cette sorte d'égoïsme enfantin, c'est absolument normal. Mais la chose qui n'est pas normale, c'est quand je suis confronté que je fais avec cet égoïsme que j'ai détruit une vie. Comment j'ai réagi maintenant sur ça? Ça, c'est la question.
And to me, this brings up the question of responsibility. Is Georges responsible for what happened to Majid? If so, how responsible? What Haneke says is true. This is normal behavior for a 6-year-old, but it did destroy Majid's life. Is part of maturity taking responsibility for things we did even before we should be held responsible for those things? As an adult, should you now look back on those things and instead of using your immaturity as an excuse, now is the time to be mature and do what you can to make up for those mistakes? Should the responsibility of what happened to Majid be put on George's parents? When George told them Majid was bleeding from the mouth, which suggests Majid had tuberculosis, was this a lie? If so, what about the flashbacks, where we see Majid clearly has a bloody mouth? Do we know for certain these flashbacks are George's memories? If they are they accurate memories, or are they misrepresentations and lies? Maybe Majid really did have tuberculosis. Perhaps we should zoom out further and look at the bigger picture. Maybe the French National Police are responsible for what happened to Majid. After all, their actions killed his parents, which put him in this situation to begin with. Haneke also says in the interview that the story of Cachet is a universal story. Any country in the world has events in their past that are horrific and tragic, those that are filled with injustice that they are trying to sweep under the rug. At one point in the film, George and Anne are talking, and the TV is on in the background. The news is on, and it's showing war and conflict from around the world. These types of tragedies are happening all over the place, all the time. The world is full of Majids. These events happen in the background all the time, while we all just go about our lives. This takes me to the fourth possibility. And the fourth one is that no one inside the film is sending the tapes. Rather, we, the audience, are sending them. Or you could even say that Haneke is sending them. My thought is that even if George were to turn around right here, he would not actually see a running camera. The tapes are essentially the audience breaking the fourth wall into the film. The question of who is sending the tapes doesn't matter, it's rather the question of why they're being sent and what the tapes represent. They represent suppressed guilt rising to the surface. They represent hidden sins and secrets crawling out of the dark holes of silence to see the light of day. They represent every injustice and act of violence committed against someone, attempting to be seen and not forgotten. They also represent the elusive nature of truth. It's a concept we all believe exists, but in trying to decipher it, it somehow always remains hidden. Let me know your thoughts and opinions down in the comments. I would love to hear from you guys on this film. If you got anything out of this video, go ahead and do me a favor and do not click that subscribe button unless you want to be haunted by the beard.